crops. So, all right, here I am again with this button. Sorry, Justin. See, the problem is my cursor goes away. Okay. So cold season vegetables, we have our brassicas, which are all of our kales and cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, all of those. These are in cool season. All of our greens, our spinaches, our lettuces, peas, onions, and our root vegetables. So our beets, our carrots, and things like that can all be planted during our cold season. So now there are a couple ways that we plant our cold season vegetables, either direct sow by seed. And I'm going to blow through this because we have that technical delay, but basically these are all the crops that we plant direct sow in the spring. And then these are the crops that we plant with transplanting. Some of these you can also plant by seed, but they're good candidates for transplanting. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about all that. That was quite disruptive and whatnot. So Justin, I don't know if there are any questions in there or not, but we can move on to onto the next section of our presentation.
Dave, your voice is good on mine. Someone mentioned that it's a little bit low. Do you want to just check your volume?
Okay. Sorry. Sorry. All right. How's that? Better?
Yes, it's louder.
All right.
While you were gone, Abhimana made a good point that we're all human.
Oh,
yes, we are. Yes. Yeah, this it's just funny, this technical problem we didn't have in either of our other classes. I don't know what's going on, but I'm actually going to leave the slides in this, if this is okay with people, because my computer behaves better in this mode. So did we have any Mercury hand?
Dominique had her hand up. Yeah, Dominique, what's your question?
Hi, so I was not able to attend the previous two meetings, but with crops that are in colder seasons, is there a difference in the amount of watering that you do? Does the frost affect the watering of the plants?
Not particularly, no. The one thing you're going to notice is in the cool season, the soil doesn't dry out as fast as in the warm season. So you might not require as much water, but the plant still requires lots of water. So that shouldn't really affect that. And just to let anybody know who did not attend those first couple, those have been recorded and the slides are available, and just let Justin know, and he can get those links to you so you can get all of that information.
One of the nice things about growing things like peas early in the season is that, as you remember, we had a lot of rain in April. And so it really helps you out especially as a first-time gardener, when you get the breaks of the rain and the not very hot days and the not dry soil, like Dave just mentioned, and you feel like you're winning, which is a fun feeling compared to when you try to plant peas later in the season or in the middle of summer. If you didn't know that that's not a good time to plant peas, they just die and it's not fun. So
right.
Can we say the frozen is over or it's still coming?
I would say that there's no danger of frost from this point. I would say that, you know, our average last frost is mid-May, and now we're looking at temperatures of 80 degrees by the weekend, and I think the long-term forecast is warming. So I would not expect another frost here for us.
Hopefully.
it should be good.
Should be good. So yeah, talking about now, I mean, Justin was just talking about how wet April was, and now we're into May, and we have a very dry week and a very warm week. So any plants that you have that you got started in the cool season, you really need to pay a little attention to, make sure they stay watered and hydrated during this warm, dry stretch. All right, so speaking of plant needs, so there are basically, you know, 4 groups of things that plants need. They need air, water, light, and nutrients. And, the air they breathe just like we do, actually opposite of what we do. We inhale and extract oxygen and expel carbon dioxide, and plants absorb carbon dioxide and expel oxygen. So it's a great symbiotic relationship. So they take that carbon dioxide along with the water and the nutrients in the soil through the energy that's in the sunlight. They perform photosynthesis that creates carbohydrates, which is carbon-based sugars that help the plant to grow, produce fruit and vegetables that we eat. So you notice here that the slide says nutrients. It doesn't say plants need soil. We'll talk a little bit more about soil coming up here. But so first of all, what is soil? So, it's not dirt. Dirt is more just, non-organic matter, minerals and things of that nature, the clay, the silt, and the sand. But to get soil, you need to add biology and organic matter. And the way that I kind of look at soil is kind of nature's digestive system. So there's a growth decay cycle in nature where plants grow, they reach their peak, they produce their fruit, their seeds, and whatnot, and then the plant dies and falls to the soil. And then the biology in the soil, which is bacteria, fungi, nematodes, arthropods, protozoa, all of these little microorganisms start to shred and break down that plant matter and break everything down into small building blocks of nutrients that new plants absorb through their roots and help them to build their biomass and produce their fruit. So soil is quite a complex organism, or I should say ecosystem, made up of many, many organisms. And in organic gardening, what we really want to do is we want to take care of the soil. We want to feed the soil. We want to water the soil. We want to cover the soil. And the soil will take care of feeding the plants for us. So we really, as gardeners, are tending the soil and letting them do their thing with the nutrients and stuff coming from the soil. So soil care, as I mentioned, we kind of want to mimic nature. In nature, you don't see a lot of torn up soil unless there's some disturbance event like a tree falling and roots up, a tree getting uprooted and pulling soil up. Typically in nature, soil is covered. And so, as I said, the growth decay cycle, new plant matter falls onto the soil and gets broken down and feeds that soil. So we try to mimic that pattern when we're doing our gardening. So we feed the soil from the top, we add our mulches, we add our organic fertilizers, we add our amendments on the top, and let the biology break that down. And with the help of gravity and water, those things work their way down into the soil. So you want to keep the soil covered. The biology in the soil likes to be protected. So think of it as a blanket or a roof on top of your soil, so that the sun and the air doesn't dry out and destroy and kill the biology in the soil. There's a saying that bare soil is dead soil. So what you really want to do is keep that biology alive by keeping it protected and covered under a nice blanket of mulch. So, and the other thing we want to do with soil care is go organic. We don't want to be adding all of these synthetic fertilizers, pesticides and fungicides and herbicides and things like that. These are all chemicals that not only are harmful to the biology in the soil, but they're harmful to us when we eat the food that we grow using these chemicals. So, so it's best to avoid those synthetic chemicals. So some of our best practices when gardening is you want to visit your garden regularly. Ideally, you want to be out there every day, noticing changes, noticing what plants need, but at least you want to be out there about 3 times a week or so, checking on that garden, making sure every plant has what it's needed and it's doing well. As I mentioned, you want to keep your soil covered, so you want to do a nice job mulching it, like we have down here in the bottom, a nice, thick layer of mulch around our plants. That's going to help to reduce weeds. It's going to help retain moisture, and it's going to eventually feed the soil as that mulch breaks down. So you also want to plant plants in community, right? Use companion planting because plants perform many functions and they can be beneficial for each other. So we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward, but we want to plant communities, not single plants. We also want good garden hygiene, right? We want to keep a clean garden. We don't want rotten fruit falling into our garden. We don't want diseased plants and things like that falling down. So we want to make sure that we take any of that diseased or pest-ridden detritus out of our garden in order to keep that healthy. And one helpful thing is a garden log, right? Just a notebook where you make notes every time you go to your garden. You make note of when you planted things. You make note of when you harvest. If you have a disease issue, when it showed up. If you have a pest, what it is. Just kind of keeping track of your activities. And then at the end of the year, you can kind of review your garden log and look at what was working, what didn't work, and help do a better job next season. So as I mentioned, one of the best practices is getting to your garden regularly, right? So what do you do when you're in your garden? You want to water if needed, right? Pay attention to your rain levels. Has it been a rainy week, a dry week? What's going on? Check your soil under your mulch. Make sure that everything is moist, and if not, water when needed. Fertilize your plants according to plan. Typically with organic fertilizers, you want to put them on about once a month. You can put it into the soil before you transplant your seeds, your seedlings, maybe a week or so before, and then maybe a week after you plant your seedlings. You might dress the soil again with some fertilizer, and then about once a month through the growing season to make sure that the plants have the food that they need. When you're there, you might want to check and see if there's anything that needs to be harvested, either a fruit or a vegetable, or even a seed, right? If you're going to save some seeds, check what is ready. Look to see if any plants need support, right? When you plant your peas and they start to grow, they're going to need a trellis to climb on. Your tomatoes, when they get too big, they don't have tendrils to hold on to, but they need support because they get too leggy and fall over. So, you're checking for that. And then you want to be constantly monitoring for pests, right? You want to look and see if there are any insects. Do the plants look healthy? Are there any signs of disease? And then you also want to look for volunteers, which is what I call weeds. Weeds are just plants that are in a place that somebody doesn't want them. So we want to keep an eye on that and get rid of any weeds as they come up. So one of the best practices is companion planting. As I mentioned, there are lots of functions that plants perform. They can help to add fertility to a soil. There's a class of plants called nitrogen fixing plants that take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and they store it in the soil in these little nodules. They actually partner with bacteria that saves this nitrogen. The plant will give the bacteria some sugar to hold onto that nitrogen and then release it when that plant asks for it back. So there are ways to use plants to do that. There are dynamic accumulators, which are plants that have deep tap roots, and they can pull minerals up from a foot or more down in the soil and bring them up to the surface. And then when you chop and drop those leaves, then those minerals are now available at the surface. So using these plants, you can add some fertility. Companion plants can also attract pollinators to your garden, which is very important. I think 80 or more % of the food that we grow requires pollination from insects. You can also attract predators that will help to eliminate bad bugs, right? In a garden, there's always good bugs and bad bugs, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there are the ones who are eating your plants, and then there are the good bugs who are the ones who are eating the bad bugs that are eating the plants, right? So we want to get to know these bugs. We want to attract these predators to help us keep our garden safe. So another thing that we can that these companion plants can do is they can confuse pests by throwing off aroma. So I like to plant flowers and herbs all around my vegetables because the herbs will put off scents that will throw off an insect who might be trying to find their favorite plant. So if you look at the picture on the right, we have a tomato plant in the middle, and you'll see some marigolds there. You see some rosemary and some basil. And the rosemary and the basil are kind of throwing out their scent to confuse any pest who's interested in that tomato plant. And the marigold is doing some pest suppression for us that emits a hormone that repels certain nematodes that attack tomatoes and other vegetables. So by using all of these other companion plants, we can get have a healthier garden and a more well-balanced garden and have healthier fruit. So just to talk about mulch for one more minute. So mulch, as I said, it protects our soil, right? Our soil is alive. It's full of biology. We want to keep that biology safe. So we want to put down a nice layer of mulch around our plants. And you can use straw, which is different than hay. Hay often has seeds, so you want to get straw, which usually doesn't have seeds or has less seeds than hay. Mulch leaves are my favorite thing to use as a mulch in the garden because there's no weed seeds and there's an abundance of them. Of course, you have to plan ahead because leaves are around in the fall, not necessarily in the spring when you want to spread them on your garden. You can also use grass clippings. A couple things to be aware of when using grass clippings is, one, you don't want to use grass clippings that have been chemically treated. And you also want to be concerned about weed seeds in grass. So sometimes when grass grows tall, it starts to go to seed. If you throw that into your garden, then you just added a bunch of weed seeds to your garden. So one other thing I'll caution you about using fresh cut grass is to not put down too much because it turns anaerobic and it prevents the soil from getting oxygen. We want a nice, healthy, aerobic soil. So don't use too much grass if you're using fresh cut grass. So some of the best practices in terms of watering, as I said, you want to pay attention to rainfalls. You want to, have an idea of how much rain has fallen during a week. In general, plants need about an inch of water per week to remain healthy. Some like drier, some moister, but about an inch a week is a good benchmark. So monitor that. If there hasn't been any rain, make sure you get out there and water your garden. Best time of day to water is in the morning. The reason for that is it prepares if you water in the morning, that water soaks into the soil, protected by a nice layer of mulch. Then when the sun gets high and it gets warm, there's plenty of water for that plant to draw upon during the heat of the day. And the other reason is that watering in the morning helps to reduce the danger of fungal diseases. So sometimes, fungal diseases, if you're watering and you are getting water on the plant matter, on the leaves themselves, if you're watering that at night, those leaves stay wet overnight. You're creating an environment that promotes fungal growth. So watering in the morning, watering the soil directly around the plant rather than pouring water on top of the plant, that is the best way to avoid that situation. And it's also best to water deeply rather than water deeply less frequently than watering a little bit every day. And why this is better is because it trains your plant to go deeper for water, right? So if you're watering a little bit every day, then that plant doesn't have to send roots down deep to find water. It's right there at the surface, and your plant isn't going to be very strong and healthy. So you want to drive those roots down nice and deep. So you're going to water a lot and a little less frequently. So pests and disease. So this is, we're always monitoring for those. We're on the lookout for damaged plant material, damaged leaves, and we want to observe that. And we want to identify what is causing this. So on the right, we see a squash plant that has some sort of a disease, and that looks like either a powdery mildew or a fungal disease called alternaria. We want to identify that as soon as it is as soon as we can and try to remove damaged and diseased plant material so that it doesn't spread. So down on the bottom, what we're seeing on the right is a brassica, probably a broccoli, maybe a cabbage that has been decimated by a cabbage moth. So on the left, we see the cabbage moth itself. So if you see those flying around your garden, you want to try to catch the host or, whatnot. But you see these little green worms, and these are the ones that hatch on the leaves and do all the damage. So we want to be on the lookout for those. So basically, if we're growing we have nice healthy soil, we're protecting the soil, we have lots of nutrients in our soil, our plants are getting all of its needs met, and it's a nice healthy plant, then that's going to be a strong plant with a strong immune system, just like us. When we get run down, we don't eat right, we don't exercise, we don't get our sleep, our immune system suffers and we're more susceptible to disease. The same is true for plants. So we want to grow strong, healthy plants to help thwart any kind of diseases. So a couple things that we can do to reduce that. As I said, mulch is important, not just to protect the soil, but a lot of diseases and pests overwinter in the soil. So putting on a heavy layer of mulch is not going to necessarily stop a pest from coming through, but it will stop soil-borne diseases from splashing up on your plant when it rains or when you're watering. So that can help to reduce that. When selecting your plant, you can select plants that are resistant to particular diseases. This can help if you've run into a disease in the past. So when you're selecting your seeds or your plants for the year, you can kind of consider that and look for plants with those characteristics. As I said in the last slide, whenever you see any diseased plants or fruits, you can remove those. And sorry, I'm getting some strange stuff on my screen. I don't know if anyone else is seeing this, but I'm getting all these blue lines. Anyway, okay, so if you see a diseased leaf or fruit or anything like that, cut it off, remove it, throw it away. We want to reduce the spread of that. So in the upper right-hand corner, we see an image of a broccoli or a brassica plant that has an aphid infestation. So that's kind of what that looks like. We see some diseased leaves down in the lower right, and you want to cut those out and remove them from your garden. If you do see any kind of these diseases, you can use some organic sprays to help to address those after removing the affected leaves. So here's just a couple of quick, easy recipes for do-it-yourself at home for pesticide and fungicide. So pesticide, you use garlic, onion, and hot pepper. You put it in some water, you run it through a blender, let it sit overnight, strain it out, and then add just a drop of biodegradable dish soap to that. The garlic and onion will help to repel pests. The capsaicin that's in the hot peppers is a nerve toxin to insects, and the soap just helps the pesticide to adhere to the leaves. So if you see a plant has an aphid infestation or something, remove the ones you can, spray it down, try to nip that in the bud. So in a fungicide, so if you see any kind of fungal diseases, a simple fungicide is baking powder, water, and again, a little bit of soap to help that adhere to the plant. I have included these recipes in the resource folder to share with you. So if you wanted to try these out and make them, the recipes are there. So one other thing that is helpful in controlling pests and disease is compost tea. So compost tea is exactly what it sounds like. You make tea out of compost. So you take compost from your compost bin, you put it in a bucket, 5-gallon bucket, add some molasses, maybe some seaweed, and you get a small bubbler to aerate that, and you let it aerate for 24 hours. And essentially all of that bacteria, that aerobic bacteria that is in the compost, feeds on the kelp, the molasses, and multiplies. And then when you spray that onto your plants, you can use it as a foliar spray, spraying it on the leaves. that's going to help the immune system of the plant. So just like we have a lot of bacteria on our skin that helps us if we get nicks or cuts, plants also do. So we can improve the immune system of the plants with compost tea. So as I mentioned, we have good bugs and bad bugs in the garden. We have bad bugs that want to eat what we're growing for ourselves, and we have good bugs that are predatory and eat those. So this is just a small list. We'll kind of get into that a little bit more in our next class. We'll do a class on integrated pest management, and we'll talk a little bit more about these, but just introducing the idea of, there are bad bugs and good bugs. So we don't want to kill every bug that's in the garden. So one example of a good bug is the ladybug, right? So these 4 pictures show the different stages of a ladybug. And the question is, why are ladybugs good? Well, they eat aphids. So in the upper left, we have the ladybug with the mature ladybug with the eggs, newly laid eggs. So the little dots, and they're usually grouped together like that. In the picture in the top right is the larva stage. And this is a stage where they eat a lot of aphids. So they're going to be on your plants and going to be eating those up. Then it goes into its pupae state where it's transforming into the adult ladybug. And again, at that stage, it feasts on aphids. So we love our ladybugs, and we want to attract those to our garden. All right, so we'll pause here for a couple of questions. Justin, I don't know how we doing there. We got some questions.
Sure. I have a question. One of the ones was you were talking about watering deeply. Is it different for the first few days?
Yeah, well, yes. When the seedling is small, the roots are not, going to be that deep. So, the great question. When the plants are small, they're going to need a little bit of water regularly because they're going to dry out faster. They can't get down deep for that deep water. So until the plant is fully established, you want to kind of water it more frequently. And then when it is fully established, then you can water less. Great question.
Cool. That was the only one. And we had one about companion planting, but I sent over the link for the guide that you had in the resource folder.
Oh, right on. Cool. Right on. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit, or we can talk when we get into the individual plants here. We can talk a little bit more about good companions for the warm season vegetables. So then I'm going to move on to this because we're at 1/4 and we got a lot of material to cover here. So I think our technical delay cost us some time as well. So we're going to talk about our peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, and squash. No need to really talk more about what they are, but we'll jump right in with tomatoes. So there are 2 basic varieties of peppers. There's determinate and indeterminate peppers, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But determinate tomatoes grow shorter and stalker, and they produce all their fruit within a couple of weeks, whereas the indeterminate, they just keep on growing and they flower constantly through the year and are ever bearing. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, but tomatoes come in all sorts of colors, shapes, and sizes. There's your slicing tomatoes, your pastes, your cherries, and there's heirloom and hybrid. So if you're looking to save some seeds, you probably want to go with an heirloom open pollinated as opposed to a hybrid F1 where the seeds of that tomato is not going to produce a true representation of its parent. But that's a little bit more complex of a subject, and we can delve into that at a later point. So as I said, there's determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. The determinate tomatoes are more bush-like. They're recognizable almost right away. They have short, stocky plants. They get about 4 feet tall. They're really compact and dense. You don't need to prune them. And they produce all of their fruit in a very short period of time, about 2 weeks, everything ripens, and then it's done. So Roma tomatoes are an example of these, and they're great if you're making sauce. You get all your tomatoes together, you can make your sauce and preserve it. So indeterminate tomatoes are your vining tomatoes. These are the ones that grow 6-7 feet tall if you're lucky, and they need support because they grow really tall and they don't have a very strong stem, so they need to be caged or supported in some way. And it's usually a good idea to prune these and get rid of suckers, which are branches that are coming out of the nodes off the root that don't have any flowers on them, and they're just drawing energy from the tomato and preventing that energy from going into producing fruit. So as I mentioned, the indeterminate or vining tomatoes need some sort of support. And unlike climbers like peas or cucumbers or other squash, they don't have tendrils that grab onto anything to hold themselves up. So you need something to support them from falling over. So a cage of some sort is your best support for tomatoes. So one other thing I want to mention about tomatoes is when transplanting tomatoes, if you look at the picture in the top there, you'll see a close-up of the seedlings of the tomato. There's all these little hair-like structures off of the stems. And what happens is when those come in contact with soil, they turn into roots and will spread out. So you want to bury your tomato as deep as you can. So in the picture on the lower left, you'll see some that first set of leaves along the bottom. I would clip those off and then bury this up about halfway, and then you're going to get a much deeper, more developed root system in a healthier tomato. So you look on the right, you'll see that tomato is buried very deep and then mulched to help protect that soil and keep that soil healthy. So just a couple things on pests and diseases. So we have the tomato hornworm, which is the image in the top right there. You'll see the little horn on its tail. That's where it gets its name. And this will devastate, it'll eat the leaves as well as the fruit. Now, the tomato hornworm below that with the little white dots on it, that actually is covered in eggs of a parasitic wasp. So if you see that tomato hornworm with those eggs in it, you want to leave that in your garden because that's going to hatch a beneficial insect, and you're going to have a lot of these wasps that will kill other tomato hornworms. So basically these eggs are growing and developing by eating the tomato hornworm. If you saw the top one, then you want to pick that and throw that away, but the bottom one, I would leave that. So a couple of other things that you run into are leaf spot, which I don't have a picture of, but basically your leaves get all these brown spots on them. That's going to be a fungal disease. You're going to want to try to remove affected leaves and treat appropriately. Blossom end rot and blight are also fungal, blight is also a fungal disease and can be removed and treated again with the organic fungicide. Now, the blossom end rot is more of a environmental condition. There are two causes for it. One is unequal watering. So if you get a lot of water and then it dries out and it's dry for a long time and it gets a lot more water, then it's going to get that blossom end rot. One other cause is a calcium deficiency in the soil causes that. So if you see those things, then you want to take a look at what you're doing and see if there's something you can do better. All right, so going to talk about peppers. So basically, we know I love peppers. I love hot peppers, but there's sweet and hot peppers. And I think all peppers that I've come across anyway are indeterminate, and that means that they continue to grow and they continue to flower and fruit throughout the year. So a plant will produce some fruit. You can harvest that. More flowers are going to get going. More fruit's going to get produced, and you can harvest that. So some peppers will grow tall enough to need support. Most of them don't, but some do. So if they get to be, 3 feet tall or so, they're going to start to lean over. Then you can stake your peppers. So couple diseases and pests to keep an eye out for peppers. So you have pepper weevil, which is that top picture up there. Cucumber beetle, which essentially affects all kinds of squash, cucumbers, and peppers. It's going to eat the leaves of the plant. You're going to see cutworms, which literally cut the plant down at the base because it crawls along the soil and basically chops the plant down and starts to eat it that way. And then you run into a couple of other situations. So there's the blossom end rot, which again, like the tomato, it's going to be environmental, either inconsistent watering or lack of calcium. And then you have anthracnose, which is a bacterial infection, and that basically affects the fruit itself and rots. So again, you're going to want to find that that affected fruit, remove it from the garden and throw that away. Don't want to compost your diseased plants, either infected with pests or disease, because you need to have a really active hot compost pile to kill all of that, and it's best just to throw that away. So I'm going to talk just a minute about squash. So there are basically two categories in squash. You're going to have your bush squashes, which again they're kind of likened to determinate tomatoes. They're going to kind of stay in one place. They kind of grow into this little shrub. Your summer squash and your zucchinis are typically bush varieties. That doesn't mean they're not going to creep along, but they're going to stay put, as opposed to your runners, which your winter squash, your butternut squashes, acorn squashes, all of those, your pumpkins and your cucumbers. These plants are going to climb and they're going to run. They have tendrils that can grab onto things. So a number of years ago, I grew some pumpkins, and I think I measured it was about 32 feet from where I planted the pumpkin to where the plant ended up. It chased the sun through my yard and came out to be about 32 feet. So those types of climbers, you're going to want to give some sort of support if you don't have a lot of space. If you're in a small raised bed garden, some sort of a trellis to allow those squash to climb, so they don't take up your entire bed. So the indeterminates, meaning that they're going to produce lots of fruit, flowers and fruit throughout the year. They're not going to produce them all at once. And there's also this parthenocarpic varieties, and that's a complicated word which essentially means they are self-pollinating. So if you're having a problem with pests and you want to keep your cucumbers or under a protective barrier to keep a cucumber beetle or some other pest out, then you're going to want to get this self-pollinating variety, because the flowers pollinate themselves and don't need the insects to do such. So you want to keep that in mind. So just kind of talk a little bit about some pests and diseases for squash. There's powdery mildew, downy mildew, which again is a fungal condition, can be caused by environmental factors, water on the leaves, watering at the wrong time. It's also, mildew or a spore, so it does spread rapidly. So you want to remove any effective leaves as soon as you recognize them. Probably the biggest pest you have to worry about with squash is the squash borer. And the picture on the lower left is a picture of the bundle of eggs, similar to the ladybug eggs, but these are a little bit more orange. The ladybugs were more yellow. The center is the larva stage, and this is the one where the stage where it gets its name, the borer. So it bores inside the stem of the squash and kind of eats it from the inside out. So if you do find those, you can cut them out and remove them as best you can, depending on where they are. If they're very close to the base of the plant, then you might not be able to save the plant. And the picture on the right is the squash borer in its adult stage. So it's kind of a pretty bug with the orange colors and whatnot, but we don't want to see those in our garden. So if you see them, try to catch and kill those. So diseases on the cucumbers, very similar to squash. You're going to get powdery mildew, downy mildew, but you're also going to get this alternaria leaf spot, which is the lower left. You get these brown and yellow, almost bullseye spots, and that is a fungal disease again, and trying to treat that as best you can. And you have the anthracnose, which is the picture on the lower right, which is kind of like a brown leaf spot. But so let's see, couple of pests that bother the cucumber. We have the cucumber beetle. That's the pictures up on the top. There's a couple different varieties. There's a striped and a spotted, so keep an eye out for both. The squash borers will eat cucumbers just like any other squash, so that's somebody to keep an eye out. Also have spider mites, which are microscopic, so you can't really see them. That I don't know how much that's blown up, but that's a very blown up image. But the leaf on the right, you'll see, looks like it's getting eaten a bit, and it's not as green as it should be. A couple of holes in it and stuff like that. So you want to look for those kinds of things. And then there's something called a pickle worm, which will actually burrow into your cucumber and start eating the flesh of the fruit. You can spot those by looking. You'll see a little hole in the outside of your cucumber. So again, when you're doing your regular visits to your garden, you want to check closely at all of your things, looking for any of these pests or diseases. So quickly, just going to talk a little bit about beans. Again, there are two different varieties, a bush and a pole, very similar to determinate and indeterminate. And the bush is a very short, squat plant that doesn't need support. You're going to get your fruit, in this case, your beans, your legumes, in probably about a 2-week period. So if you're doing succession planting, you can plant your beans, your bush beans, and then 2 weeks later, plant another row of that. 2 weeks later, plant another row of that. And then when you're done harvesting that first row, your second row will be ready to harvest. And then your third will be coming in after that. So it's a good way to stretch that out throughout the growing season. So yeah, most of the time I direct sow my beans. They're very, grow very easily from seed. So I don't bother buying any kind of seedlings for those. So some pests and diseases, again, we're going to run into that alternaria leaf spots, which is that picture up on the right, those yellow and brown spots. I'm sorry, that's the bean rust, is that picture. Very similar to alternaria leaf spot, but a little bit more measly of a pattern. Aphids are a problem with that. You have your cucumber beetle likes the leaves of bean plants, so keep an eye out for that. Cutworms as well. You'll see the picture on the lower left is a cutworm, and the picture next to that is a plant that has been chopped down by a cutworm. And you also run into spider mites. So again, basically diseases and pests are going to come into 3 categories. You're going to have, it's an insect, it's a bacterial infection, it's a viral infection, or there might be, environmental conditions that can cause problems. All right, so fertilizing, as I mentioned, should have a plan to fertilize, or at least a schedule to fertilize. So after you put in your seedlings, you want to, my computer here. You want to plug in, you want to plan out your fertilizing. So about once a month, but maybe a week or so after you plant your seedlings, you can add your fertilizer. And all your organic fertilizers are going to have the big 3, which are your macronutrients, your nitrogen, your potassium, and your phosphorus. But organic fertilizers are going to have more micronutrients than some of your synthetic fertilizers. So here's just some, things about when to fertilize. I've already really kind of talked about this. Prior to planting, you can mix it into your soil. You can put it a week or 10 days after your planting of seedlings. And then, monthly for all your established plants. And so if you look at the 2 pictures at the bottom, the picture on the left shows the fertilizer being applied, basically right at the base of the plant. That's not the way I like to do things. I like to spread it around the plant. Basically, if you think about the drip line of the plant, you want to spread it around the roots of the plant, not right around the stem. So just kind of a best practice there. So we're at 8 o'clock. That was my last slide. I apologize for the rush through and the technical difficulties, but let's see if we got any questions here. Any more questions there, Justin?
Let's see. Someone asked, this last question that just came in from Elizabeth. What might be happening if you get tall bean plants but no flowers?
Huh. That's a good question. I have a slight dyslexia, so I can't remember whether it's the potassium or the phosphorus, but one of those macronutrients is helps plants flower. And so it may be a deficiency in one of those, but I'm not really sure. Not really sure. That's a great question. I have to look into that.
Would fertilizer be weaker with seedlings for the first time? Do you need to make it less powerful, or?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that's true if you're using a synthetic fertilizer versus an organic fertilizer.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that synthetic fertilizer is chemicals and nutrients that are plant ready. That means that they are ready to get right absorbed to the roots of the plant. And so you can burn the roots if you give them too much nitrogen. Organic fertilizer is more of slow release. It has to break down over time, which is why you do it about once a month through the rain and the bacteria and the biology that's in the soil. It's going to break down the organic fertilizer into those nutritional blocks. So I think it's more of a slower release. So you probably don't need to worry too much, but I wouldn't over apply for seedlings just in case.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is one of the questions here, best quality mulch that you would recommend if you don't have access to leaves?
Well, there's a straw that has been heat treated to ensure there's no seeds. It might be a little bit expensive, but that's probably the best thing. I think, Justin, that's some of the stuff that we've used in some of our gardens. I forget what they call it. There's a name for that.
Yeah, Listern, I think.
Yes, that's the one. So that would basically ensure that there's no weed seeds in there. So if you don't have leaves, straw, heat treated straw, like I said, grass, fresh grass clippings are good, but don't apply them too heavily. The other thing you can do, and sometimes I do this, I will collect my lawn clippings in a bag and I'll spread them out on a tarp, very thin, and let them dry out. In a matter of 3 or 4 days, they've turned brown, and then I can apply that to my garden. So you can kind of make your own straw out of fresh grass clippings by drying them out. One other thing we use is coffee husks that we get from A&E Coffee that we spread around. It's a great mulch. I find that's best to mix with something else because it's so light that it blows away really quick, but it's good to mix in with straw.
What about pine needles?
Pine needles are good. There's a myth that pine needles cause soil to get acidic, more acidic, and that's not true. It is true that pine trees like acidic soil, but the needles that they drop do not acidify soil. So you can use pine needles. And they're actually really great because they don't decompose as fast as leaves. So the mulch lasts.
And then, Dave, I know in another class we talked about organic fertilizer a little bit. Is it as I tend to just go with the simplest possible, which is the Garden Tone product by Espoma.
Yep.
do you, is that, I mean, that's just sprinkle at the base and let the rain do its thing. Do you have other options that you prefer?
Well, there's lots of things you can do, making your own homemade organic fertilizers, but the Garden Tone is a good product, as is this Down to Earth is another good one. So there's a lot of good store-bought organic fertilizers that you can purchase. If you want to make your own, there are things that you can do also. Coffee grounds are a great organic fertilizer. You can just put spent coffee grounds in your garden directly. Eggshells are another organic fertilizer you can add on your own. I would recommend drying them out and crushing them into a powder and then spreading that powder. That's going to add calcium and other minerals to your soil. You can actually brew grass tea. So if you mow your lawn and you got a bunch of fresh grass, put it in a barrel of water and let it sit for a day or two, strain that grass out. A lot of that nitrogen that is in that grass will now be in the water, and you can add that to your plants. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get creative to add that. Manures are a great organic fertilizer. So rabbit droppings, rabbit manure can be directly applied to a garden, does not need to be composted. Chicken manure, it's best if it's composted. The same with cow and horse manure, it's best if it's been composted. But those are great amendments and fertilizers that you can add as well.
And then another question that came in was just about good bugs and bad bugs. And I think we can talk about those all day, which is where it kind of leads us into our next class is actually going to be all about good bugs and bad bugs, because there are so many of them and they're hard to identify, and they come in, they look different when they're eggs and they look different when they hatch, and then they look different when they start flying. So
Right.
Our next class is actually going to jump into those and really go deep on some of those, the good ones and the bad ones.
It will, and I have the resource list that I used to put this presentation together, and most of these are through universities, they're cooperative extensions, but let's see. So, I guess I didn't add these two there, but in the share folder, the resource folder that Justin will email to everybody, email the link to, there's a couple of PDF files in there. One is about attracting beneficial insects to your garden, and another one is 25 bugs that you do not want in your garden. So there's a couple more resources there. Abhimana, if you have questions after looking over those, feel free to drop myself and or Justin in an email and see if we can answer those questions. But yeah, to everybody, there are those two resources in the resource folder as well.
Cool. And I think that covers all the questions that were in the chat anyways. Does anyone else?
All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Actually, yeah, do you, yeah, the other thing that I wanted to share here was just the, as we are all getting ready to have our abundant seasons with all this great info, just wanted to remind people of the Little Free Farm Stand. So if you have extra food and you want to share, we have, actually this year is going to be a little bit different than prior years. We're actually going to have drop spots throughout the city. So whether you grow it or you want to just grab a little extra at the grocery store and then share it, we'll have the opportunity to for those spots to be available throughout the city, so you can easily add a little extra to, and then we'll distribute it out at the Little Free Farm Stand to people who struggle purchasing fresh veggies. So it's a good way for community to help community. And then also just wanted to say thanks to Feed New Hampshire to helping sponsor our trainings this year, and keeping these trainings coming for us so that we can all have Dave's expertise in our heads, and he's also a great resource afterwards. So if you have questions, like he said, feel free to shoot us a line, and we will do our best to answer it.
Yes, and to that, I didn't show this slide, but there's my contact information and Justin's, our email addresses are on the last slide of the presentation. So when you get that resource folder and look at the slides, you can find our email addresses in there.
I want to pop yours in the chat just real quick, Dave, before you go.
Yeah.
And yeah, so with that, we will bid you adieu, and thanks for coming. I will send out a link to everybody with the resource folder, and also the sign up for our June class, the Good Bugs, Bad Bugs, and also the recordings will be in there within a day or two. So thanks so much for being here, and we will look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, hope you all found it helpful.
It was great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, thanks, Justin. All right. Do you want to hang out, Justin, and chat, or you good?
Yeah, I'll hang on for a moment. Absolutely. Can you hear that background noise?
Yeah. Was that Colton?
Yes.
Nothing.
People are home. They went out. They had stuff going on tonight.
All right.
Oh, we had
All right.
a little curveball there, huh? With that technology tonight.
Yeah, you're still recording, by the way.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, thank you.